Good afternoon. Welcome to the session Decarbonizing the Energy Sector, the Role of ADB's Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, and Partnerships. My name is Hannah Ebro from the ETM team. We are happy to see all of you interested in hearing about different perspectives on energy transition. Our team has prepared a two-part session to cover this broad topic, hopefully allowing us to maximize the afternoon and learn a lot from our lineup of esteemed speakers who will talk about the challenges and opportunities in pursuing energy transition. Without further ado, let's start the program with opening remarks to be delivered by Andrew Jeffries, Advisor for Energy Transition Mechanism and Partnerships from the Energy Sector Office under ADB Sectors Department 1. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this ADB session on the energy transition mechanism and to share this space with so many committed partners, experts, and practitioners from across the Asia Pacific. As many of you may know, the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM as we call it, ADB's flagship initiative to accelerate the shift from coal to clean energy, was launched at COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. Since then, we've been learning, adapting, and scaling our approach with the support of partners like a number of you in the room today. Today's session is a chance to reflect on that journey, hear what's working on the ground, what are the challenges, and most importantly, think together about where we go next. There's a lot to unpack. How to make early coal retirement financially viable, how we're working with governments, the private sector, and how we're ensuring this transition is just and inclusive. So why does this matter? Coal-fired power is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions from all of human activity. And as it's a major contributor to air pollution and public health risks worldwide. The Asia Pacific region accounts for over half of global emissions and clearly has the most coal-fired power generation capacity. So it's mathematically not possible to stay within reasonable global emission limits without addressing this issue. So since its establishment, the ETM program has been working in 7 countries, from pre-feasibility work to full-scale feasibility studies, market and grid analysis, strategic environmental and social assessments, including just transition risks to livelihoods, stakeholder engagement, and a number of pilot transactions in various stages of development. And each is bespoke by necessity, given very unique challenges to each one. There's also extensive work on carbon market modalities to try to bring additional revenue streams and incentives to bear. One of the latest milestones is the launch of ETM's engagement with Kazakhstan, with a memorandum of understanding signed at COP29 in Baku late last year. And this is to conduct a feasibility study to identify pilot transactions in line with the country's decarbonization strategy and need to modernize its energy sector. So we're deeply grateful to the governments of Japan, Germany, and New Zealand, our valued partners in the ETM Partnership Trust Fund. I see one in the audience today. There may be others, but I just want to thank them for their support. Their support and commitment has been critical to ETM's progress, turning the vision of a just and inclusive energy transition into tangible actions around the region. So one of the strengths of today's two-part session is that we'll hear directly from those shaping the transition in their countries. We're honored to be joined today by esteemed representatives from Cambodia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and the Philippines, as well as some of our ADB sector and thematic specialists. Their voices and perspectives will ground our conversation in the real-world experience. We'll begin the session with a brief presentation by our colleague David Elzinga, the team leader for the Energy Transition team, who will provide a detailed update on ETM's progress and challenges. This will be followed by a panel discussion on country perspectives, an opportunity to learn directly from these officials about opportunities and challenges they face in decarbonizing their energy systems. This is a chance for all of us to reflect on the different pathways countries are exploring and what lessons we can draw from one another. There'll then be a 30-minute coffee break to coincide with the sessions going on, around the building. And then in the second part of the session, we'll shift gears to explain and explore some of the key enablers of the energy transition success through a series of thematic presentations. These will touch on some of the most critical aspects of ETM's broader ecosystem, from evolving financial partnerships to just transition approaches, civil society engagement, and carbon credit frameworks. So we'll be talking about how we can create incentives and structures that can deliver results and scale impact while ensuring that the affected community voices are heard and no one's left behind in this difficult transition. So all of this rests on strong partnerships. Within ADB, the core ETM team works hand in hand with experts from various departments around the bank to ensure a coordinated and informed approach. Beyond ADB, there's constant collaboration with the public and private sectors, governments and utilities, with development partners, think tanks, philanthropies, and civil society. So none of us can do this alone. The energy transition is not linear. It's complex and involves tough trade-offs, evolving priorities, uncertain timelines, and shifting dynamics. But it's also full of opportunity, and it demands that we bring every tool, every perspective, and every bold idea to the table, with the understanding that what works in one situation may not work in another, but by building on knowledge gained and collective lessons learned by all parties, we can build a toolkit of approaches. So as the Asia Clean Energy Forum marks its 20th anniversary, the theme Empowering the Future reminds us that innovation, partnerships, and smart, innovative finance are no longer optional. So let's use this time this afternoon to go deep. So I encourage you, please ask a lot of questions, challenge assumptions, and most importantly, connect with others in the room. So again, thank you for being here, and I will turn it back over to Hannah. Hope you enjoy our sessions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy, for giving us an overview of today's agenda and reminding us that only by working together can we develop impactful solutions for Asia's complex energy transition. Let me now call on stage the ETM team leader, David Elzinga, Principal Energy Specialist from the Energy Sector Office under Sectors Department 1 of ADB, to provide us an overview of the ETM program and what ADB has learned so far in piloting it. David?
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Andy, for starting the discussion. So I want to highlight a few things today, give an overview. Now, I know some of you in the room have heard me speak a few times, so I apologize to you for having to listen to me again. But I really hope that what I can leave you with is ending on what have we learned through this journey so far. So the ETM, the Energy Transition Mechanism, is supporting the coal to clean transition, also heavy fossil fuel to clean transition. And while this is an idea that I think there are so many drivers that it makes sense. Everybody logically, when we hear about this, we say, okay, yes, this makes sense, we should do this. But then when we dig into this, we find out what are the real challenges with making the energy transition in this way and really accelerating that transition from coal and heavy fossil fuels to clean energy. So I'll talk to you a bit about our journey and end with what are the kind of key lessons that we've learned up to this point. So we started our journey in 2021, where we engaged with the Philippines and Indonesia as real leaders who wanted to go down this path and looking at. And over the last about almost 5 years now, 4 and a bit, we've been able to deeply engage with Indonesia and Philippines and Vietnam as our first countries. We've then began in 2023, we were able to start looking out to the broader ecosystem. For instance, engaging with MAS in Singapore, looking at other partners from a financial perspective on how we can move this forward, begin to scale up this initiative. Because the work that we're trying to do here, we feel like we're at the very beginning of the journey. This is not something that we can do, but we hope that ADB is well positioned to provide that comprehensive overlook. And I just want to highlight last year, where at COP29, we signed an MOU with Kazakhstan. And this is our growing, indicative of our growing number of countries that are interested in making this coal to clean energy transition. But every country is different. And that is something that we see over and over again. And the challenge is, how do we take the lessons learned that we have in one country and use them in a new country, but also while being responsive to the needs there? So again, going to the basics. The share of coal in around the world is incredibly resilient in the power sector. You know, when you look at that black line on the your left-hand side, it remains flat. We've seen countries that have decreased their share of coal in the power sector, but on a global basis, this has remained very resilient. And we can understand why this has happened in Europe and in the US, and there are reasons for that. But when we look to the right-hand side, we see that shares of coal in power systems are very, very large. And, you know, you can look at the renewables, they seem very low. I like to view that as not a lack of success, but rather the huge opportunity that renewables have. And I think that it's a really exciting time for this. And you know, here's the reason behind that. Under a business as usual, when you build a coal plant, it's going to operate between probably initial PPA, 20 to 25 years, technical life at least 40, in reality, longer than that. Now, that's going to have a couple of consequences. It's going to, of course, have the emissions that are harmful to people. It's going to reduce space in the power sector for renewables. But of course, at the same time, it's providing a valuable commodity, whether that's power only or heat and power. So this is very important. So why is this now an exciting time for the energy transition? I think if we look at this point in history, I've worked in the energy sector now for, you know, since graduation. That's only 5 years ago. I mean, 25 years ago. And in that respect, I started my career in solar, and the cost of solar, I honestly didn't believe it would come down to the point it's come today. But now the renewables, solar in particular, can be less expensive than coal on a new build basis. But actually, how do we deal with the existing infrastructure? And the gap is decreasing. So we are at a time where this makes more financial sense. But if we do nothing, these plants will not retire. So with the energy transition, we're talking about a managed phase out. So this is not shutting down plants tomorrow. Economically, that's very difficult. That would be very difficult for the people and communities, those who work in the coal plants. And it would be difficult for the power system to continue to operate under such a disruptive approach. So we're looking at a managed phase out where we reduce the life. The benefits to that is that we will reduce emissions, improve population health. It'll create more demand for clean energy, and that's going to continue to drive down the price of those renewables. And over the long term, that's going to lower the overall cost of the system while continuing to provide the needed power and heat to drive societies from an economic and social basis. So I feel like this is the right time in history, in the power sector, in the energy sector, that we can really take on this ambitious role to accelerate the shift from coal and heavy fossil fuels to clean energy. But to do that, it is not just technical, it is not just financial. We have to look at a range of aspects, and we call it the 4P approach: people, policy, power, and partnership. We of course have to consider the impacts of the people. We can see the many positive impacts that closing coal plants can have from a health perspective, but we also know that people and communities depend on coal power plants for their jobs and their livelihoods. We have to make sure that as we make this shift, we're doing it in a way that is positive for everyone. And we've seen examples around the world where this has been done abruptly and communities have been decimated by that. That is not what we want to see in our member countries. Policy. Policy will often drive which technology is most cost effective. So that doesn't mean that's the only technology that's cost effective. It's cost effective in that policy environment. So working to change policies to be supportive of clean energy, renewables, and also looking in the long term to carbon markets that can accelerate this shift and make it an enabling environment that can support clean energy, reducing that gap between existing power and clean energy. Of course, we have to look at the power sector, understand the system to make sure that we're doing this in a way where the system remains reliable and robust. And I think the country where we've been challenged on this the most, and I think it was a really, I'm glad I'm Canadian for this perspective. So when we visited Kazakhstan, many of the people said, how are you going to provide me heat and power in the middle of winter? And my response would always be, I'm Canadian. And then they would relax, and then we would have a meaningful discussion. So I always appreciated that. But these are the real questions that have to be asked. We have to make sure that we address the coal to clean transition that is in a way that offers reliable and secure power for the countries. And lastly, partnership. And Andy highlighted this already. We've listed a number of organizations before, and again, I'm glad to see so many people in the room today. We have to find a way to work together. This is a massive problem that we need to address, and we can only do that if we work together, finding those strengths that we can build off for each other. Just simply highlighting the different types of phases that we go through. And, you know, sometimes I get frustrated with we need to address pollution, power sector development, climate change. We have to do this in an incredibly rapid way. This is very urgent. But at the same time, we have to do this in a way that is very thoughtful and organized. And we often start with the pre-feasibility study, working with the countries to understand what is the context. When we get to the full feasibility study, and sometimes in parallel with the pilot transactions, we have an opportunity to really look, what are the solutions that fit that country? What are the things that we can invest in to accelerate the energy transition? And we're not quite there yet on the scale up, but that's something that we're looking towards. How do we create transaction models and approaches that we can then scale up and, again, work with partners to move this forward? And here I want to just simply highlight the range of different ways that ADB is trying to support this. Looking at the middle, doing studies, doing direct transactions, working towards building a fund vehicle that can scale this up. And we've been able to do that with funding from through our ETM Partnership Trust Fund. And that's been really instrumental in allowing us to do this work. So lastly, what I want to highlight, what have we learned through this journey? And I think this is something that we at the beginning of this year really took the time to reflect on, and is influencing how we're going to go forward. So first point I want to highlight, coal plants rarely retire naturally. There is something that is driving them out of the market. And sometimes that's gas. I think in the United States, natural gas, cheap natural gas is what has driven coal plants out of the system. We see in some countries where coal plants just keep operating. They can get refurbished. It is economically viable to put in an amount of money and operate them for another 10 to 15 years. This makes sense if you exclude the climate impacts or the pollution impacts. So we have to acknowledge that and find ways to push those plants out of the system. Otherwise, they will just keep operating. Genuine engagement is highly valued. We have to go into the countries and listen. Like I said in Kazakhstan, I could say I'm Canadian. We can understand each other what cold climates mean. We have to do that in every country. Telling them what to do is not appropriate. That will not get us anywhere. Countries do want to transition away from coal, and for a range of reasons. So I think I never want to go into a country and I use the word demonize, make them look bad for using coal. That's not the point. The reason they use coal, there's a long history. There's probably good and bad reasons for that, but we need to meet them where they are. And that's why I love the word energy transition. We meet them where they are and we work with them, partner with them to move forward. And I see a welcome area in that for energy transition and coal to clean. Energy security and affordability are paramount. Climate is important for many countries, but energy security and affordability are the top of the list even before climate. And we have to acknowledge that. Politics and policy can often change rapidly. We've experienced, I think someone corrected me, I said 2 elections in over the countries we've worked in. I think it's actually 3 elections. And people change. There's shifts in governments, both at the bureaucracy level, but also at the political level. This requires us to create robust solutions so that we can keep going. Transitioning away from fossil fuels requires complex financial engineering, and not everybody can fully understand that. That's something that we found, and when we try to bring solutions, doing that in a way that the broad range of stakeholders can understand so that we can get the buy-in across the board. And lastly, the impacts of energy transition are far-reaching. We have to consider the economy, the power system, social aspects of individual communities and workers, along with the broad coal value chain. Jobs are so important to every country because that is how people live, feed their families, and vote in their countries. If we don't address that, we won't be able to continue to make these changes. So these are some of the lessons. I'm sure that we're going to hear from other speakers today with additional lessons of what they've learned, but I wanted to share this today and really look forward to the ongoing discussion that we have with you in the room today and going forward as we work towards the coal to clean energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I didn't know I'm older than you. So thank you, David, for sharing what you've learned through our journey in ETM through this past years. This is a good way of setting the scene for the next part of our program. So this is the first of 2 panel discussions that we will have this afternoon. The first one will feature representatives from countries that are working with us in ADB in designing their energy transition pathways. This session will be moderated by Lazina Rahman, Senior Climate Finance Specialist from the Energy Sector Office of Sectors Department 1. Zina?
Thank you, Hannah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So as David pointed out, a key learning from our ETM development of fossil to clean strategies over the last 4 years is that it is incredibly context specific. Each geography presents a unique set of considerations, including the stage of renewable energy development, reliance and availability of fossil fuels like coal, stage of industrialization, private sector participation in the economy, and national NDC strategies, amongst other drivers. So the discussion today aims to draw out some of the nuances of this energy transition, assessing common threads between the countries, as well as salient differences that we need to keep top of mind as we are advising as development partners and private sector investors supporting an energy transition across this region. On a more practical note, so for this session, we are going to be using an app called Slido to collect questions from the audience. So you will see here a QR code shown on the slide. And you can use that to put in your questions for the speakers. So you will be able to see the questions that others have already put in, and you can vote to have them sort of be considered. The Secretariat will be consolidating the questions, and they'll prioritize the questions with the highest votes later for Q&A. Please, when you're putting in your questions, identify the speaker you would like to address. Now, we will not be able to get to every single question, so in case you would like to receive a response in writing at a later time, please leave your name, your organization, and your contact information. So now that we have gotten that out of the way, we are honored to welcome 4 panelists who are all very actively involved in their respective national energy transitions. As I make your introductions, I kindly request the panelists to take their seats on stage. So first we have Mr. Dimas Mohammed, an advisor to the Indonesian Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources on energy transition. He is also the Deputy Coordinator at the Secretariat of the National Downstreaming Industry Development and Energy Security Task Force. Welcome, Pak Dimas. Yep. Next, we have His Excellency Undersecretary Leedon, the Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Cambodia. In this role, he is assisting the minister to oversee the Department of Energy, Business Policy and Cooperation, and the Department of Nuclear Science and Technology. Thank you. From Kazakhstan, we have Deputy Director Turar from the Power and Development Department in the Ministry of Energy. Thank you very much. Yeah. We are now grateful to welcome Director Michael Sino Cruz from the Philippines, from the Energy Policy and Planning Bureau of the Department of Energy. Thank you. So thank you all again for your participation. We will first turn to Indonesia. So as one of the first ETM partner countries, Indonesia has made significant progress in establishing an enabling environment for coal repurposing in Indonesia. Can you describe your recent accomplishments, drawing out some notable elements of energy transition strategy in Indonesia, as well as 1 or 2 challenges you might have faced and overcame in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in driving policy reform?
Okay, thank you very much, Lazina. So a very good day, magandang aray for everyone here. First of all, thank you for having me. I've been a huge advocate and supporter of ETM internally within the Indonesian government, to the point that I was often caricaturized as a mole, as a double agent for ADB. And me speaking here at the lair of the enemy, there's nothing to dispel the myth. But I've been doing what I've been doing is entirely because of my firm conviction that, as David and Lazina pointed out, there is so much that our country, our people can gain in the short, medium to long term from energy transition mechanism. So speaking directly to the question posed by Lazina in terms of the recent accomplishment. So although the agreement with Indonesia was signed in 2021, 2022, I have actually been involved in ETM starting 7-8 months-ish ago. So if you want to ask why it's taking Indonesia so long, please do not ask me, because I was not involved in the initial phase of the agreement. But I think over the past 7-8 months, with very close collaboration with Lazina, David, Jan, and everyone in ADB, I think it's safe to say that we have made some stride, some progress that I think we need to be thankful and proud of. I think if I may, just would like to highlight two of them. The first one is that after much discussion, finally there was a 3-ministerial joint decision to determine which scenario that the Indonesian government would pick to replace the coal power plant in Cirebon, the pilot project for ETM in Indonesia. And finally, our Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, finally issued the ministerial regulation on energy transition, which, among others, also enshrines the pathway for the coal repurposing, coal power plant retirement, as agreed with our partner at ADB. In terms of the progress and what are some of the challenges that we managed to overcome, I think another couple of things is first, we really pivoted away in terms of the narrative from this is good for the climate, for emission, for the planet, but really to make the narrative more grounded on economic development, on job creation, on industry, on supply chain creation. And one of the ways we do that is we tweak the scenario to replace coal, because initially when I joined the team, much of the coal replacement will derive from gas, which of course is still cleaner compared to coal, but its economic impact in terms of supply chain development, job creation is very much limited. So we pivoted away so that there will be a much greater focus in the coal replacement scenario on wind, on solar, which in terms of job creation, which in terms of investment is much more massive than gas. So every time we talk about ETM to our minister, to other stakeholders, we're not talking about through ETM, we're going to save gazillion tons of emission. We're talking about how through ETM, we can create 19,000 jobs for the people. For example, from the construction of the solar power plant to the manufacturing of the solar panel. We're not talking about the carbon emission, we're talking about at least 125 million investment in the supply chain development, in the establishment of solar PV factory that can produce solar panels that will then be used to replace the coal in Indonesia. So I think pivoting away the narrative from merely climate emission to really on carbon, on economic development and job creation, I think has been quite helpful. Another thing is, this is something quite unique to, maybe not unique, quite context specific to Indonesia. In Indonesia, we have this state loss concerns, which of course has a very noble purpose. So all government regulations, all government measures, government actions are mandated not to create state loss. And this can be quite tricky because we have the pilot project of ETM will be in Cirebon. It's a relatively new asset, and the replacement energy for the coal will be higher in terms of the electricity costs. So in terms of that, the state costs risk is something that we had to grapple with quite a bit. And thankfully, again, with close partnership with Lazina and the team, we managed to pivot away the state loss allegation because, like for example, with gas, initially the gas price that was supposed to be used to replace coal was quite low, and that would trigger the accusation of state loss because the gas coming from our own gas supply is priced too low, and we will be accused of creating state loss because we are forcing the gas to remain very cheap to replace the coal. But because we pivoted away from gas to solar, to wind, so that part of the state loss allegation is mitigated. Another thing is not only we reduce the costs from the cost side, but also in terms of the benefit, the concessionality of ADB. And this is something that I would like to end with, which is super important because, of course, through ETM, we want to create jobs, we want to reduce emission. But if it excessively burdens the state payers, the taxpayers' money, then it's not something that our government will want to touch on. And through our close collaboration with ADB, we managed to find a mutually satisfactory number, so to speak, I hope, with ADB in terms of the financing support that they could give to us. At one point, we were forced to ask for more from ADB, and ADB, being a good partner as they have been, can consider that request. So at the end of the day, the financing support from ADB is really one of the major variable that enable some of the recent accomplishments of ETM in Indonesia to transpire. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dimas, for your partnership and for highlighting, some of these key arguments for energy transition that have to resonate, especially for those, those who are governing and have to be responsive and speak to their constituents. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Next, we have His Excellency Undersecretary Lidin from Cambodia. Can you walk us through some of the key drivers in Cambodia's energy transition right now? And do the priorities around energy security, foreign investment, or industry play a role as the energy mix evolves? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm from Cambodia. The Ministry of Mines and Energy is essentially responsible for three sectors. Energy, of course, minings and mineral. And that means that we also regulate the coal production and coal import, and as well as oil and gas. Thank you for ADB. Thank you to ADB and for having me to come to this ASAF, as well as the session this afternoon. And I am so glad also that Cambodia is part of the ETM, although we are just take the initial step compared to my ASEAN counterpart here. It's much more matured and a longer journey. But I think it's the first step in the right direction, I hope. So going back to your question about what are the key driver for us to go through energy transition, I want to frame the conversation in two ways. One is from the supply side, another one is from the demand side. From the supply side, in terms of Cambodia's energy generation mix, it's quite heavily focused, dependent on hydro and solar power at this point in time. We are embarking on a more ambitious goal. As we stand today, we are more than 60% already renewable energy sources, and coal make up around 30%. But to break that up even further, domestically generation constitute about 86% or so. But then we also import from our neighboring countries around 13 to 14%, and that include Laos PDR, Vietnam, and Thailand. So from the supply side, we want to be more ambitious, although I'm not saying that coal does not make any significant to our generation mix, because we also rely on coal for our base load. They are still play a very critical role in our generation mix. But then another side of the equation is we also heavily dependent on 100% import from Indonesia as well. So that is kind of the risk, and we have experienced in the past about the fluctuation and due to geopolitics and supply chain and all that kind of stuff. So that's a kind of external threat that we face as a nation. And of course, on the other side, we need to make our economic competitive. We are still an emerging and growing economy, and therefore we need to be competitive in this region. So on the demand side, the nature of our economic mix are essentially driven by three sectors. One is on agriculture, second is on manufacturing, and third is on tourism. I'm going to just focus on manufacturing. And why is it important from the demand side? Because the manufacturing that Cambodia is doing is mainly export oriented to markets such as the EU and also the United States and the rest of the world. Therefore, our buyer, our importers are more demanding. They are looking to industry to take the step on, much more clean energy sources, lower their energy intensity and be efficient in their production line. Therefore, I think looking from both the supply side and demand side, Cambodia need to embarking on this energy transition, so that I'm not saying that we will be left out, because again, this is a journey, and I like it a lot. I think Andrew and David just now speak very thoroughly and very comprehensively about the need for ETM, and again, we're very grateful to be part of it. And donor country like Japan and Germany, to pay focus in this part of the world, in this region, because it's growing, and Cambodia is also part of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Leedon. I think highlighting, we especially appreciate you highlighting sort of the economic incentives and the role ETM can play in competitiveness and trade. So now, Deputy Director Tarara, I'm turning to you. So Kazakhstan is the leading ETM in Central Asia, and it's the first country in that region that has adopted the decarbonization strategy by 2060. Do you think this engagement with ETM has the potential to transform the power and heating sectors in Kazakhstan in line with national priorities? And how is Kazakhstan approaching this phasing down from coal as well as just transition?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Good afternoon, everyone, esteemed guests, colleagues. First of all, I want to thank ADB for organizing such an event. I'm very glad and proud to be part of this event. Returning to the question, yes, we have our plans, we have our commitments, we have signed all kinds of international documents, which shows that we are willing, we want to go into that direction, we want to move in that direction together with the world. ETM, we see ETM as something that would be essential, would be like the first stepping something concrete that would help us to see what we can do with our energy system. Because as David mentioned, David actually told everything about Kazakhstan in a few words. I mean, he said that it's for us the first question, the main issue is about heating side, not about the power, but it's more about the heating part, because Kazakhstan is has very harsh climate, down to -35 in the winter times. We are somewhat similar to Canada, but at the same time, we are quite different from Canada in terms of availability of the gas infrastructure, of the reserves of the gas, and historical forming of the cities. We have mainly in all of our cities, we have the district heating systems, which are mainly coal powered. Somewhere we have like heat only boilers, somewhere we have the CHPs, and these CHPs, they are binding the power sector with the heating sector. And to be honest, we don't see like a reasonable solution that could be reliable, that could be affordable to our economy. But we are on a way to make this feasibility study, and we have very high expectations. We want to see like what can we really do, because we also care about our people, about their health. We want to have this clean energy, but we also want to we want it to be affordable and reliable, because renewables, as we all know, they are not very stable in terms of generating power, and we also need to compensate somehow this base load. I mean, like everyone has the same issues, the same problems to tackle, I think, in that aspect. So for us, and another thing about ETM is about the coal industry. We as Ministry of Energy nowadays, the functions like regulative functions on this coal sphere is also coming to our ministry. Yeah, so we are somewhat similar with the Cambodian ministry in that aspect. And you see, like the coal industry is also like one part of our economy. So here arises the question about the just transition, how just it is, because we are similar in that aspect with Indonesia. I mean, we are coal exporters. The main part, we use it like domestically to the power sector mainly, but also like a good share is going abroad. We're like making money to the state. So these are some questions that we are hoping to solve through this ETM, after this feasibility study. We want to see the results. We are urging to see the results. And yeah, we have these commitments, low carbon, decarbonizing to 2060, and we hope that we will get there by that time. And ETM, we see it as a crucial instrument that would help us. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turar. I think I appreciate you highlighting that, ETM is an ETM and the process is a transition, and there are various phases of analysis, and we're eager also to engage in that with you. Now coming home to our host, Director Sina Cruz. How do you plan to balance energy security with the goal of reducing dependence on coal and fossil fuels? And sort of what are the unique challenges being presented in the context of, the Philippines' more liberalized power market? And just as looking into the future, how do you envision regional cooperation for energy transition, particularly in the ASEAN region, as the Philippines takes on the chairmanship next year?
Okay, thank you, Christina, and thank you to ADB for inviting me here as part of this forum. So, being in the government, in a liberalized market, it's very difficult on our part, because on one side, the civil society will, encourage us to go for RE. On the other side, the industry would want us to provide them with reliable source of power, which is coal. Okay, so how do we balance this? So we are facing a very complex situation. As mentioned by David, unlike in other ASEAN member states, like Indonesia, Malaysia, in the Philippines, the power sector or the energy sector is a privatized sector. So since we instituted the reforms, it resulted in a decentralized decision. So meaning the decision in terms of investment will be, it's within the private sector. What we can do is just to provide the policy for them to be, to encourage the private sector to invest or to decarbonize their portfolio from coal to clean fuel. So it's clear in our plan, the Philippine Energy Plan, that fossil will remain part of our energy transition. So the same as Indonesia, we are highly dependent on coal. Although we are dependent on the coal exports from Indonesia. If Indonesia stops exporting coal, so therefore we don't have any coal to burn. No? Kidding aside. Okay. So how do we balance this? No? So we need to institute reforms. One of which is in the renewable energy. We have instituted the renewable portfolio standard. We even increase it to from 1 to 2.5%. And we are thinking of in the future, because we set a higher target for RE. And if this is not enough, there will be another discussion if there's a need for us to increase the RPS. Or there's no need for us to increase the RPS if, for instance, the carbon credits we can sell it. So because under the framework of carbon credits, if you have RPS, so you cannot sell because that is double counting. So these are the things that we're looking at. So there are many things that aside from the RPS, we even implemented the reverse auction for the RE to ensure that we do have the capacity needed to meet our target. But basically, what is important is on access to financing. This is the Central Bank of the Philippines and even the Department of Finance are doing the policies on the green bonds or the sovereign guarantee, among others, to de-risk the investment specifically on clean technologies. And this is another challenge for us because, again, this is a private-driven energy sector, and therefore, in terms of investment, there are some investors who would be hesitant. They cannot because they cannot get the additional financing to proceed with the projects. Okay. The other one is on although right now we have in place the coal moratorium, but we said that there will be some exemptions to that, and we are still in discussion if some of the exemptions for from this coal moratorium, if you're going to put up coal for own use, you need to specify in your plan how you're going to shift to clean energy. Like you start with the co-firing first, from coal, co-firing, and then eventually adopt a clean technology. With regard to ASEAN, so we'll be the chair of ASEAN next year, and we can steer the discussion on energy transition. And we're looking at whether there is a need for the ASEAN to establish a task force on energy transition, specifically looking at the just transition. And it's also clear from our secretary that we'll be pushing for interconnectivity. Although Philippines is considered as an off-grid among the ASEAN, but we're still thinking in the future that will be connected because we in ASEAN we can pull the RE and then we can trade it among ASEAN member states. And the ETM is a good program from ADB because it provides low cost financing. But there are two candidates for coal early retirement. One is in Mindanao under the ADB, and the other one is private initiated coal retirement, the South Luzon thermal energy. And I always mention this, that these two projects would serve as proof of concept. If these two projects will eventually result in a successful early retirement of coal without any other issues, and then therefore other proponents of coal will eventually adopt this kind of business model for them to early retire their coal facilities. And we are also partnering with other development partners and even the civil society, looking at the impacts of this energy transition to other sectors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Senior Cruz, especially for highlighting the regional kind of the promise of continuity on this regional topic. So just to start out on the Q&A front, I was hoping that each of you could share maybe one thing that another speaker had shared that resonates with you and your country context. I know, Dimas, please.
Yeah, thank you. Before addressing the question, if I may, I just would like to give a quick shout out also to Rani and Ria, because in the spirit of nobody left behind, because there have also been. Now, I mentioned David, I mentioned Lazina, I forgot to mention, and I remember that you're not left out. Yeah, who really has been doing so much instrumental work with us. Thank you. So as our esteemed dear colleagues from the Philippines and Cambodia alluded to, that Indonesia is a huge coal exporter, including to the Philippines and Cambodia. In fact, in 2023, more than half of global thermal coal in the market, 50%, more than 50%, comes from Indonesia. So my message to ADB is, please only do ETM on Indonesia. Do not do ETM on other countries so that they can continue to use our coal. And this is really a huge challenge, because Indonesia is one of the very specific places in which there is a very strong dependence on coal for the economy. And we're not talking, of course, we're talking about the livelihood of so many people depending on coal production and coal mining. But because coal is very important to the economy, in some provinces, like 30% more of the regional GDP of their province comes from coal. So of course, coal gives power to these very powerful individuals who may not be very excited with the idea that coal should be left behind. And in our work, we have been engaging with very prominent people, very prominent politicians who publicly say that coal is God's blessing to Indonesia. You know, are you against God? You cannot. And that, you know, if that conversation reaches that point, it's very difficult to retort back with any other suggestion. But in this regard, I think, so given the very strong coal dependence of economies such as Indonesia, it's not the ideal place for you to do ETM. But I think if ADB does ETM in Indonesia and it works, I think it really demonstrates a clear success story that even if a country is so dependent on coal like Indonesia, that there is a pathway for transitioning away from coal. And I think, again, a part of that story is that economic development narrative. So we are pushing hard on the solar PV industry, on battery industry. In fact, some of the largest coal conglomerates in Indonesia, thankfully, are starting to diversify their business away into batteries, into solars. So there is a possibility that even amidst a very strong reliance on coal in terms of the economy, that there is a way. And in fact, in one of our calculation that we did with our ADB partners, we also calculated the additional fiscal revenue that Indonesia can generate through the ETM pilot project with ADB. Because now, for coal power plant, with our abundance of coal, we set a lower price for coal to be supplied to domestic power plants. So the price of coal that our coal miners get from Cambodia, from Philippines, is actually much better than the price of the coal that they get if they supply to the domestic power plant. So we are trying to calculate to do the analysis to show that actually the coal miners would be happier if they can export the coal, and the government will also be happier if the exporters, if this export can be allowed, because the government can collect more revenue from the taxation of the transaction. So I just want to highlight, it's very difficult, very challenging. We are getting pushback left, right, down, up, but it is possible.
So let me start off by saying that I think maybe this is my second time hearing about coal as a God-given. I think the first time I've heard such a phrase was back in West Virginia, where a lot of the population feel that, like, I think David was saying that, or Andrew was saying that the reason a lot of the coal power plant in the United States got phased out because of the cheap available of the gas. And essentially, I think that's a good example where you see that people kind of left behind. The whole industry kind of collapsed, I think, in the state. Coming back to our conversation, what can I learn from the previous speaker? Of course, I think we share a lot of the common some of the challenges that we face. I think what the Philippines is facing in regarding as a policymaker, I think on one hand, you want to, transition your energy mix to be a much more cleaner. Even if it's already clean, you want to be more ambitious. But like on the first day, I still remember the phrase where the Secretary of Energy of Sri Lanka was saying, today's percentage will change over time because due to a higher demand, and therefore, let's say, you are at 60% clean renewable energy today, 5 years, 10 years down the road, because of your economic structure, your energy demand may change, and therefore you may have to come up with, a whole lot of generation mix that change that number. But to make my statement short, I really like what Indonesia was saying, not so much on what to do, but so much on what not to do. For example, in the case of coal to gas, of course, the government of Cambodia has made a commitment saying, and back in, I think, 2021, that we're not going to build any new coal fire power plant. Only, I think, in that sense, we also look at LNG solution. However, now that, again, this is another energy transition mechanism that we can go with. It may not necessarily be as cheap, low cost as coal, but at least it's a little bit more, cleaner. On my second point is that, the renewable energy space that Indonesia is advocating about the supply chain, the value chain, ranging from the manufacturing to job creation and all that. Cambodia is fully aware. We look forward to do even more as we deploy our wind turbine and as well as battery energy storage solution in the coming years. Thank you.
I think when I was replying previously, I already described like what we have in common with these countries. With Indonesia, we're like in the same situation around mining coal, exporting that, and, like gaining some revenue from that. With Cambodia, we share like same functions as the ministries. But you see, as a Kazakhstan, as a country, we are we have two main things that we need to solve in the way to this zero carbon development. It's first of all, it's heating, as I said before, and second one is getting the reliable sources. Yeah, so like everyone has that problem, and as it would affect the consumers, we have to take care of the costs of all of these solutions. So that's something that I think not only the countries that on a panel, but everyone in the world shares. Yeah. So if we are somehow getting somewhere, like getting the like good technological solutions, we will reach those goals that we are setting, like very ambitious goals. Yeah, I think it's possible.
Well, in our case, we even included in our plan the voluntary coal retirement, and even the repurposing of coal power plants. But the challenge is how are we going to repurpose the coal power plant? The only way to repurpose it is through co-firing with biomass for now. And we're talking here of ammonia. According to Japan, it will be commercially available by early 2030s or 32, 33. So that is a challenge for us. Although currently we see that with these carbon credits, the transition credits, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a privately initiated coal retirement that would also get transition credits. We are talking with Singapore right now and we are finalizing the implementation agreement with Singapore to sell the transition credits. So there's a replacement from this coal retirement, and they're going to put up RE facilities. And the other thing is that although if you're going to look at provision with regard to carbon credits, if you're going to retire the coal without replacement, that will not be covered by carbon credits. There must be a replacement. So that is an issue. Because if, for instance, you're going to retire your coal and then you're not going to put up any replacement, so what's the benefit of retiring your coal other than it? And I mentioned that the only way to repurpose coal right now is through co-firing with biomass. Or you can convert it. I don't know if you can convert it to gas or to other technologies. But based on our initial assessment, the only way is to do co-firing with biomass for this repurposing. And if you're going to, because if you're going to look at the as mentioned by David, no, maybe 20 years ago the cost of solar is so high, and now it's lower now, and even the other technologies. But please take note that we need also to consider the system costs, not only the LCOE, but also the system costs. Meaning that is what we are trying to look at, because in the first question, how do we balance the reduction of fossil fuel in our energy mix in terms of energy security, affordability, and reliability? Is in terms of affordability, we need to make sure that in terms of system costs, the impact of which can be manageable. And that would fall under what we call just transition, that it will not add additional burden to our customers. So we are very clear in our plan. So we're going to reduce the share of coal, and we are trying to look at the other technologies that can repurpose the coal facilities. Thank you.
So I think this has been incredibly illuminating, and one way I'm seeing a lot of the responses is the complexity of the energy transition, and ETM is really also can be characterized as responding to the multiple constituencies involved. So you're talking about industrial demand, the suppliers in terms of actually the coal industry itself. You're talking about the communities around, as well as electricity consumers and workers. So there's just a lot of those involved, and to kind of achieve an alignment will require a lot of continued deliberation. On that note, I think we are ready to perhaps take some questions from the broader audience. I think, Hannah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Lazina. So we have 3 questions addressed specifically to PAC Dimas. Actually, now 4. I'll combine the 3 questions into one. Basically, they're about state laws. It was a very insightful talk, PAC Dimas, according to the person who asked the question. Could you elaborate more on state laws? And perhaps also another question, is something like the Ayala-ASEN deal, selling green bonds, is a way to avoid state laws? And another question, is the state laws regulation still relevant given that PLN is now managed by Danantara?
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for these absolutely not difficult questions. Yeah, it's at any point, if I legally implicate myself, please remind me, Rani and John. no, this issue of state loss is a very delicate problem for Indonesia because, so to give you a quick context, Indonesia democratized in 1998, and one of the major objectives of that democratization of the reform is to make sure that in terms of public budgeting, there is accountability, there is transparency, there is zero corruption. You cannot create loss whatsoever for the taxpayers' money. So very noble, very good objective, of course. But often, not often, sometimes it can turn into something that really impedes the government from doing anything meaningful, because many of the major corruption prosecution in Indonesia are actually related to the state loss issue. So in Indonesia, many of those who are accused of committing corruption are not necessarily taking public money. So it's not as if like they are receiving bribes or whatever, but they were prosecuted because they took policies that business decisions that were interpreted by the law enforcement of creating state loss. So this is a very emotionally sensitive issue because Rani and David can definitely attest to this. Every time we had countless discussions with various stakeholders in the government, they often give the analogy, okay, we signed the ETM now, but what if 10 years from now, in my retirement age, I'm already playing with my grandchildren, the law enforcement agency knocks on the door and tell me that 10 years ago you are creating the state loss because of the ETM. So this is a huge problem, challenge that because I think nobody, the government, the ADB, nobody is planning to create state loss, right? So there have been many very challenging financial calculation. I think this is also a point David brought up about not everyone, including myself, is like fully immersed into the nitty-gritty of the financial engineering. And sometimes the law enforcement agency has their own lens of how to calculate the potential benefit, potential loss. And if the financial calculation is not aligned with the law enforcement agency, it can create a serious risk. But I think it's safe to say that ADB and the government continue to work together to make sure that nobody will be accused of state loss. And I think, right, that's the shared spirit. In terms of the Danantara, that's true. So now there is a new SOE regulation, basically saying that state-owned enterprises like our own state-owned electricity company can be shielded from the state loss prosecution if they undertake business decision. But there is the government corruption law remains, and the state loss clause is still enshrined in that government corruption law. So that is why there is still some concerns. But I think overall, it shows that the government is still supportive of the ETM, but wants to do it in a way that makes sure no loss is created. And sometimes it takes more time, it takes more processes, but maybe it's worth all the hassle because at the end, we want to make sure that no loss is created. Instead, we will generate so much benefit for the government, for the community, for the people.
Thank you, Pak Dimas. We'll now proceed to with asking the most popular question. I guess it's addressed to all. What are the most difficult commitments from the governments are expected with ETM?
I'd want to take interpretation of this question and throw it to our panelists here. But I think, essentially as part of ETM, and when we're talking about specific investments, specific projects, I think the overarching premise of ETM is that there is a no new coal commitment in some capacity from each government. And I think Director Sino Cruz, you is touched on the part that it can't be a blanket no new coal. Like there have to be some considerations for needs of that you can't foresee. So from that perspective, maybe I'll throw that to the panelists. Anyone who would like to answer on sort of how you consider these nuances.
So I guess I can take it first. I think in terms of commitment, I only have 2 points. One, from Cambodia context, I think we have to go to the basic, and the basic, I think as we all sit here through the forum and anywhere else in energy topic, is always about security of supply, reliability of the system, affordability for the people and the industry, and of course the favorite word is sustainability, which is encompass all. So the commitment of the government, if you don't have a choice, we have to commit it all as a policy maker. But how do you balance that? I don't know, you call it dilemma, trilemma, or multiple dilemma, you can name it. So, I mean, that's the basic thing. On my second point is regarding to phasing out coal in Cambodia case. I think from our ministry perspective, we only look at 2 angles. One, we are committed to the power development plan over the long term, which is 2040. And with that regard, I think Anthony here is very knowledgeable in Cambodia context, but we only are asking two points. One is if we were to replace coal, bring back the early retirement by about 10 years, that would be the least, what are the options for the least cost, to replace that. So one thing is least cost. Second thing, it has to be in line with our PDP. If we were to bring on the renewable sources such as wind and solar or BSS solution into the system. And the last part, we have to do the system study. That's more or less on the technical, grid stability, what will, bring more VRE into the system, into our system mean by, and we have done that in the past when we, establishing the PDP. So kind of round it all up. I mean, it's, I know it's not that simple in terms of the commitment, but the government, have to balance both the security of supply and at the same time, energy means power, power means growing the economy, propelling it to grow and make us still a competitive, player in the region and in the globe. Thank you.
I think I should agree with my colleague from Cambodia. As a public servant, you have to give those commitments if they are being pushed, and we don't have any other ways to go, but for us, the main issue could be, and I think it would be, the no new coal plants, because again, like we have the issue with the heating, we have like really outdated, very old facilities especially in our northern and eastern regions where we have like the harshest climate. And as of today, we are expecting the results from ETM, results from feasibility study. If we are getting some good technical solutions, affordable solutions, we might give those commitments and say that we aren't going to develop anything like any coal in the future. But as of today, with the current situation, we see like we have like 2 ways to go. We are saying that we will close that coal power plant, and people would freeze through the winter in 1 year, or we say like you have to wait a little bit. We will find out something, and then we will change that not clean solution, and we will give you some like clean energy in the future. But that's what we are facing as of today. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay. I just want to tell our audience, so we have received questions addressed to ADB, specifically on carbon credits, climate finance, carbon finance, also economic diversification. So just promoting our second panel discussion after the break. So those questions will be answered there. So right now, we are going to answer this question regarding job creation. Have you done anything regarding job creation for and capacity building of women in the technical side of wind and solar energies?
I'll take the opportunity to sort of interpret it in the context of perhaps what we've been discussing. For sure, kind of the promotion of women as part of the energy transition is a key consideration for ADB. And in the case of wind and solar energies, what we're talking about is the role of women and overall kind of reskilling as part of a just transition, as part of coal retirement and fossil to clean. Have there been aspects of your policy considerations or analysis that have touched on these points, and anything that you would like to share?
Okay, for the Philippines, we have this technical committee looking at the just transition, and under this committee, our task is to come up with a roadmap, specifically skills mapping, among others, looking at the skills gap. And I believe that ADB is helping us on this initiative as well. Under this roadmap will be gender equality will be integrated in this roadmap, and part of this roadmap also will be the national certification for this skills needed for the transition, and the technical education and skills development, or TESDA, in the Philippines has also started the program on offering skills on PV, and I think wind turbine system skills, and even batteries. No? And CHED will also looking at whether we can do a ladderized program for the skills needed for energy transition. So this will be all part of the roadmap that the government, headed by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, together with the Department of Energy and other government agencies, will come up with this roadmap to address the skills gap, even gender equality in terms of energy transition.
I think wrap it up on this side. I'd like to pose a question to each of you. Just we've covered the fact that overall ETM and the energy transition is a multifaceted challenge. If there's one particular pillar of support or work stream that you think, could you cite one particular form of support that you would request from international partners like ADB? Please highlight sort of what those are.
Hello. I think part of the ETM is looking at the impacts of this energy transition. And part of the program is looking at the communities to be affected by this energy transition, and providing them alternatives to lost livelihood in case that a coal mine or coal power plant will be closed. The challenge is that when we look at energy transition, we need to look at the net job creation. The jobs to be displaced and then the jobs to be created. The issue is that for thermal plants, we need more jobs compared with RE. So that's a challenge. So we need to look at not we need not to look at only the job to be created for the RE development, but we need also to look at and assess the jobs to be displaced because of this energy transition. So in short, we need to consider the net job creation for this energy transition. And part of the ETM is looking at the impacts. No? And we even ask other development parts like UNOPS. I am discussing this with UNOPS to make a survey of all coal mines in the Philippines, looking at how many workers to be affected, even the livelihood, and even assess what will be the alternatives for them. Once we do have a policy of closing down in the future, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, to close these coal mines. So thank you.
In terms of ETM, what we would like to ask ADB to help us would be more on the side of the demand side. You know, like we as a country, we have, in my opinion, we have really huge potential on energy efficiency. But I mean, if we say that we are consuming less, then we're generating less, so we are reducing the carbon emissions. So on that part, I think your help would be very, very appreciated. In terms of thermal modernization, maybe, like, because we have a lot of buildings and households, apartments that have been built on the Soviet Union time. And in Soviet Union, somehow it appears to be that they didn't even care about energy efficiency. Yeah, because we had, at that time, they had like really enough power, enough resources. Everything was like very cheap because of all that country and all that time. So I think it would help us to on this road to the zero emission. It would be very helpful if ADB would support us on that side. Thank you.
Try to be brief. I guess what ADB can do and help member state like Cambodia. I think at least in my career, I've seen ADB have made some history for Cambodia, at least in energy sector already. Not somewhat, but very significant. I give you a good example. When our infrastructure, generation, distribution, transmission was not ready, ADB was there to advise us to start import from our neighboring country, Vietnam, to trying to get access. So we worked very hard over the last 20 years in terms of putting together our access story, going from 14% in the early 2000s up to 95% of the household right now. I mean, on grid and off grid, of course. And with that, my second story is, we were holding out, waiting when a lot of the member states in ASEAN was embarking on solar PV. We just said that feed-in tariff is not suitable for Cambodia at that point in time due to our economic structure, due to our revenue structure. The government just cannot afford any subsidies or, so we will hold out until the price was coming down. ADB was there for us to pilot the 10 megawatt solar panel, solar PV. And the rest is history. Right now, going from 10, now almost to, I think coming up, it's maybe close to a gigawatt hour of solar. So that's the second history. Again, ADB has been there for us, and now with the ETM, I'm looking at another history if we were, to do that. And so, essentially, going back to the presentation that was put by David earlier, I guess I like the concept of 4Ps a lot. I think the first time I heard 4P was in my marketing class, but I did not know that it also exists in energy. So we'll go from there. Of course, I think partnership in this regard, understanding our context, understanding our supply, understanding where the country is going. From the demand side, we want to still to grow our economy. We still want to make Cambodia as competitive. Again, I repeat that phrase a lot. But at the end of the day, it translates to industry. It translates to the people. What do they want, and how can the government, shape that? And I think, again, ADB is already in two of the major policy in the past. I mean, the post-COVID thing. One is the PDP that take us to 2040. They are ADB has been instrumental in putting the energy policy in place for us that, took me almost 14 years to get that, realization. But now we are in implementation stage. Again, my last point is, I think your advice, your technical assistance, your understanding of the different financial mechanism will help propel us in moving in, again, the right direction, that we are committed to no new coal power plant, but then also how to repurpose, how to integrate VRE into our system without put too much disturbance, too much pressure, too much interference into our economy. So let me leave with that. Thank you.
I echo all the excellent points shared by the previous panelists, in particular what Director Sino Cruz said about job creation. So my suggestion to ADB in our future partnership is to really focus on that economic development narrative. Of course, the climate, the carbon emission reduction is an important part of it, but to make it more resonant and relatable to people, I think the economic development should be at the heart of the partnership on ETM. And thankfully, because especially for a resource-rich country context like Indonesia, fortunately, thank God, coal is not the only thing we found beneath our ground. We also had nickel, the world's largest reserves of nickel, and bauxite that can be used for aluminum frame for the solar PV. And thankfully, we are also working closely with ADB to develop this critical mineral supply chain, solar PV supply chain, battery supply chain, because at the end of the day, this is about the livelihood of the people. And unless there is something that can deliver better prosperity, better dignity for them, hopefully in the form of critical mineral and renewable energy supply chain, then we are not cut out to really make ETM happen without ensuring the people that their livelihood would actually be better with ETM.
We just remembered that we have also like something to ask of ADB. Just remember, we as a country, like I don't know, I mentioned it here or not. We are like 9th big in the world, like territory-wise. So we have different possibilities to different sources of energy, and one of them is like a thermal energy. We have like thermal energy sources in our eastern part of Kazakhstan. The water temperature is 112 degree or something, somewhere there, like quite hot, and is already has been drilled and checked and ready to be used. Yeah, if you can say so. So we would be very happy if ADB would help us to facilitate that. I mean, to give like to assess like the costs of implementing this thermal technology of power plant, thermal power plant, geothermal power plant, so that we can discuss it with our community. We say like we have this potential, it would be this much, but we understand that the operational prices would be very low for the geothermal resources. So that's our second wish. Thank you.
So thank you all very much. I appreciate the panelists for your candid insights and your partnerships. I think we take note of, really highlighting the economic imperative for ETM and the urgency of exploring sort of alternative technologies and paths forward for coal-fired generation. So on that, positive future-looking note, I thank you and I welcome everyone to have some coffee outside. And please return for our second panel where we'll discuss more of ADB's review of the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for the second part of our session on decarbonizing the energy sector, the role of ADB's energy transition mechanism and partnerships. For those of you who have just joined, we welcome you and we're glad to have you here. Earlier, we heard speakers from Cambodia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and the Philippines talk about how their countries are pursuing low carbon development by powering their economies with clean energy sources and transitioning away from fossils. In this session, we'll be able to see the multifaceted nature of energy transition. Let me now call David Alzinga, ETM team leader and principal energy specialist from the Energy Sector Office of ADB, and our panelists from Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department and Office of Markets Development and Public-Private Partnership. As they make their way here on the stage, I'll just mention a few things. As you can see in the slide, we have a QR code. As with the earlier session, we encourage the audience to participate in the session by posting your questions in Slido at any point during the panel discussion. You will also see questions that others asked already, and you are encouraged to vote for those you wanted to be asked so that the Secretariat can consolidate them later for the Q&A. So I hope that's clear. And now we're ready for our second panel. The floor is yours now, David. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks to all those who have joined back. And end of the day, this to me is a fun panel because I get to talk with my colleagues who I spend a lot of time with, trying to work out the different parts of ETM. And, it's like having a conversation with friends. Again, as Hannah highlighted, I want to encourage you to ask questions. I have 1,000 questions. I can talk on these topics all day, and I do that every workday. But I also want to give you the opportunity to ask questions to either individuals or groups. So this topic, this session is meant to talk about things that are kind of outside the financial and technical aspects, but in a way, so many of these things are interlinked. We're probably going to touch on elements of financial and technical anyways. So I want to encourage you to ask anything that's on your mind with respect to ETM. And so what I'd like to do just to start, I'd like to just ask my colleagues to just give a quick 3 to 4 minute intervention, just kind of highlighting an overview of the work that they do that's specific to ETM. So then I'll start over, Joyce, with you, and please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce. I'm with the Partner Funds Division of the Asian Development Bank, and I'm involved in co-financing. We help mobilize resources to enable the ETM initiative. So over these past few years that we've been doing ETM, and even from the discussions today, I think that we really realize how complex of an initiative ETM is. So partnerships, we hear that often. That's not just a buzzword. It really is important that we find ways to work with each other for different reasons. The pioneering nature of ETM means that no organization, not even us, has a monopoly of know-how, how to make this work. And then you have the range of stakeholders and factors involved. And of course, the scale of the resources that are required to put up proof of concept and move on to scale. So in 2022, ADB set up the Energy Transition Mechanism Partnership Trust Fund. And this was a platform to mobilize concessional finance to support ETM. Now, the ADB has different trust funds that are meant to support clean energy and associated technologies. But this was the first trust fund with a specific mandate to support and enable the accelerated phase out of fossil fuel and enable a just transition to clean energy. So it was really set up with a specific purpose in mind. But at the same time, one of the things we were intentional about was to build in flexibility. Because at that time, we weren't really sure how ETM transactions would look like exactly and what needs and challenges would emerge. So we built in flexibility in terms of how we were able to work with partners, the kind of contributions the trust fund could receive, and how we could deploy resources. Because as ETM continues to evolve, our hope is that the trust fund remains responsive to the needs of the DMCs, to be able to meet them in their respective contexts and to be able to respond to the opportunities as they arise in the initial pilot countries in Southeast Asia, but even beyond. And we've been seeing more of that movement. At the same time, the goal is to have mechanisms and systems in place that through that evolution of ETM, we're still able to align with our donor priorities and to make sure that we're aligned with the results that the trust fund intends to achieve. So David, one of the challenges that we've been encountering, and again, this has been highlighted even more in the past year, is the scarcity of concessional finance, especially grant funding. So it's a limited resource, which is why, again, we were very appreciative of our financing partners who came alongside us from the beginning, because this is also a long game. The government of Japan was our anchor partner. They provided seed money for ETM when we were starting out. And then there's the government of Germany building on a long-standing co-financing relationship. So we know each other, we've worked well together. And also the government of New Zealand, who we were working with for the first time in their capacity as a trust fund contributor. So we appreciate their support, their trust, and also their active participation, because again, this is a long-term initiative, and our hope is to build on these relationships as we move ETM forward. And just a final note at this point, on financing partnerships more broadly, when we try to do something new like ETM, I think it's important, even on the part of ADB, that we're open to new ways of working. We're quite established in our ways, but this calls for new ways of working and even new partners, including, in this case, non-traditional donors, such as philanthropies, for example. And one example of that is our work with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, or GEP. They're an international philanthropy. They contributed to a different trust fund, but still towards the goal of supporting energy transition as well as energy access. So over these past few years, we have benefited and we have been learning much from these partnerships and platforms. And our hope is to build on these relationships for the longer term as we continue to pursue the goals of ETM and even apply these principles as we mobilize resources for other development issues. I stop here.
Thanks, Joyce. And yeah, this has been set up very new and innovative, and we really have appreciated that work, and it's now deploying it. We see the real opportunities to use this money to further this work. So thank you for that introduction. Rengina, if I could ask you to introduce your work.
Well, when I speak about my work, I was for me, I just joined the ADB's NGO and Civil Society Center, but it was a natural transition because earlier I was also part of ETM that, and my functions were associated with making sure that the social safeguards aspects are incorporated from a compliance perspective. But going beyond that, I was also working as part of one ADB ETM team to make sure that meaningful stakeholder engagement is an essential, an intrinsic part of ETM. And we've been working together with our government counterparts as well as civil society, and been undergoing and conducting various types of engagements, from consultations to addressing questions and whatnot. And this experience was very helpful in a way that it informed, since the beginning, the concept of how we approach stakeholder engagement for ETM was something that we had to debate internally also, because it's not about standalone investment or typical business products that are well known, and we would follow traditional approach to planning, designing, planning, and implementing and monitoring our stakeholder engagement. Because of the nature of ETM, and I took some notes from the earlier session, which was very helpful and refreshing to hear, both from ADB but also from our government counterparts. The complex nature of and financial engineering of ETM calls for a differentiated or innovative approach to stakeholder engagement as well. So all of these discussions helped us formulate our approach to stakeholder engagement planning. And we are now happy to be able to at least see how we can standardize this approach. And in a capacity of representing NGO and civil society center, our role is both to reach out to CSOs and NGOs and make sure that we liaise between them, and we enable meaningful dialogue between ADB ETM team. And when it comes to the project design or transaction design, we make sure that stakeholder engagement is included as an element there. And we guide the teams both from the civil society, internally within ADB, and we work with our government counterparts to make sure that if there is a need for capacity building, for awareness raising, if there is a need for tools, templates, and guidance on how best to make sure that the stakeholders are engaged and are on board. So this is where we are coming with our expertise from the NGO and civil society center angle.
Great, thanks, Rangina, and looking forward to digging into understanding that a little bit better through some of our questions. But yeah, it's been a very important and deep part of ETM. Swati, over to you.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Swati D'Souza. I lead the Just Transition work within the ETM team. We've heard a lot in the last session about transitions is not just about climate change. It's about economic development. It's about the people, the P in the 4 Ps that David likes to talk about. And that is the core of what is Just Transition. When the approach that we have for Just Transition is one that it's not just about the cost, but it's about the opportunity. What is the opportunity when we think about transitioning ecosystems, when we think about transitioning a fossil fuel reliant community, or when we think of transitioning an entire supply chain and value chain that's been linked to fossil fuel transition, right? In this particular statement, there are about 4 or 5 different stakeholders, if you think about it. One, you have, of course, the employment and the people that are linked to this particular ecosystem. Then you have governments that derive revenues. We heard Pak Dimas, we heard all the countries, and especially where extractive resources are there. So then you have the governments that are benefiting from the current ecosystem. Then there are the businesses that are already entrenched. So when we're thinking of Just Transition, it's people, but it's people, it's economics, it's financial, it's cultural, because there are a number of places that have their identities linked to a lot of these communities and a lot of these places. So now you think of this really immense topic, and then we have to downscale it to ETM. Right? And you have to downscale this to a project. You have to downscale this to a particular either thermal power plant or a mine which have regulated boundaries. And it's complex engineering. At the end of the day, it is complex engineering because you are managing the expectations of people, because it's their livelihood that you're talking about. You are managing the expectations of the local government for whom that asset is equally important as it is important for the people who are working in that place. And then you're managing expectations of the investors, of businesses in that area. And this complex engineering, how do we break it down? I think we can leave that for the next round, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thanks, Swati. And one thing I've learned today that I'm very excited about is that you made mention of the 4 Ps of ETM. 4 Ps is also a pizza chain in Cambodia and Vietnam. So anyways, that's just something I'm excited about. No, thanks, Swati. And you know, it was you know, really amazing to hear the last panel just highlight you know, the economic development imperative as part of ETM, as part of any project that ADB does. But to hear that articulated so clearly really fits with you know, what we're trying to do overall, but specifically in that JT side. So thank you for that. Now, Dion, over to you.
Hi, evening everyone. So I'm Dion. I'm from our Office of Markets Development and PPP, and we work together with the ETM team to try to expand further where we can get that financing solution that would help us address, you know, the funding need for accelerated early coal retirement. I think earlier Joyce mentioned that concessional financing is becoming much more scarce recently. So we need to start looking at other avenues where potentially there could be funding that would help address that economic gap relating to early coal retirement. And this is where discussions around transition carbon credit started. Right? So transition carbon credit allows us to go beyond the loan refinancing through concessional support that we have considered for ETM. With transition carbon credits, we broaden our potential base or sources to include also corporates or investors that may be willing to contribute towards accelerating that early coal retirement. Right. So in that sense, because concessional financing is not hard enough, we try to create an even more difficult project, which is to bring together a whole new product, a whole new market to bring in that needed support to accelerate early coal retirement. So what do we need to get a transition carbon credit product to work? Right? I put it in 4 broad buckets. The first one is we need a common language, a common understanding, so that then this would facilitate that flow of investments into transition carbon credit, which we can use for early coal retirement. This common language is usually being known as methodologies, standards, Article 6 frameworks. So you think of it as the enabling environment that would allow investors, sponsors, governments to be on the same page in terms of what are the type of projects that would apply, right? What are the applicability criteria? What kind of projects would it work? Do we need renewable energy pairing to be part of this? What are the measures in terms of baselining that we all need to agree on? Remember, in early coal retirement, it disappears today, and then we still need to get credited for the next few years. So that level of baselining is going to be very important. Right? The next one will be country level actions or commitment. Countries play an important role when it comes to carbon credit, because carbon credit at its highest principle is a country-based resource, right? So there needs to be commitment from the country in terms of their own pathways towards decarbonization, be that it's their energy transition plan, their NDC commitments, as this becomes the baseline in which this level of carbon credit engagement can happen across countries. Right. Another part of that is whether there will be what they call corresponding adjustments. Right? The market would need some level of assurances that the countries are not going to be double counting these carbon credits, what they sell versus what they would recognize for themselves. Third one is with regards to the project itself. So we need to make sure that there is a good selection of high integrity credit projects. This is where sponsor level commitment and sponsor level actions are going to be integral. How do we make sure that the projects that are being supported with this would have high level of permanence in terms of making sure that there is no return to what was before, right? If we are meant to remove operations or remove certain emissions, we need to make sure that that's irreversible. How do we make sure also that the funding proceeds that come to the sponsors are not being channeled again into polluting activities, right? So that level of sponsor commitments need to be part of the consideration. And lastly, we need to make sure that there are financing solutions and broad market participation. One of the challenges here is that if we need the investors or the corporates to participate, there is a significant delivery risk that is involved, right? We expect them to make upfront commitment of financing to allow us to retire the plants early, but they would then rely on the mechanisms in place to ensure that there is delivery of these carbon credits for which they have invested in. So these are some of the aspects that we're working on. We're nowhere near complete in this. There have been some progress in areas of this. For example, in terms of methodology and standards, at COP29, there has been some forward movement in terms of the Article 6 framework. Last month as well, Vera has already published the first approved methodology for the voluntary market. And we expect that all this ongoing conversation with the stakeholders would help all of us find what is the pathway in which these transition carbon credits can be realized. Trades could happen, purchases could happen, and ultimately we were able to accelerate retirement of coal plants from them. Thank you.
Thanks, Dion. And this is a topic that I find very deep, very essential for us to go forward. But as you said, it is definitely a work in progress that we're continuing to travel the journey on. And listening to all of you speak, I found it interesting. I said, this is not necessarily technical or about finance, but, Swati talked about engineering. We had two finance comments, and of course, it's all towards the people, where Rangina is focusing on the engagement with civil society. So it just really illustrates, I think, the complexity of this and the interrelated nature of this. I still reflect several years ago when we started this journey of, okay, we just need to have a financial model and figure out how to close this coal plant and it'll be easy. And it hasn't turned out to be that way, but doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, of course, right? So Joyce, I'm going to come back to you. You highlighted in your comment the grant funding as being incredibly valuable and increasingly scarce, and we're seeing that where the donor community has been very generous to support this. But then looking forward, we have to use this because we don't know if there is going to be more resources, but we can foresee the need. So how is the ETM, the trust fund, the PTF, as we call it, the Partnership Trust Fund, how is it structured to really ensure that we have the highest impact with the grant funds that we have?
So the ETM PTF has mobilized around over 80 million in grant contributions, and we're very appreciative of that. And by no means this is the only source of funding, but we'd like to think that it provides ADB with a valuable tool in its suite of financial, technical, and knowledge solutions to offer countries in order to move these transactions forward. So there are different ways by which ETM has been structured to ensure that we are able to use or direct these grant resources to be particularly strategic or impactful. For one, there are different modalities the trust fund can use to deploy support, so that hopefully the kind of support that we provide is relevant to the needs and to the contexts, whether that's through technical assistance, to help develop an enabling environment, to develop that common language that Dion was referring to support stakeholder engagement and even regional cooperation. So we can do that. We can also do grant components of ADB's own investment projects, but even standalone grants to third-party financed projects to help attain that level of concessionality required by the transaction overall. So we're able to provide support through different modalities. Another way is through our governance structure, and this is quite important. Because when the ETM trust fund team determines where the grants go, we don't do this in isolation. We try to determine that there are direct links to the ETM objectives. So we try to make sure that there are concrete contributions to the results framework. And we also consult with a technical working group. And we have a steering committee that assesses these fund applications. And we also try to determine, is the ETM trust fund the best source of resources? Or are there other trust funds with other, grant resources that can also support that particular objective? So just making sure of that. And building on that, I think the consultation process is very important to align supply and demand, because again, this is a scarce resource. So the fund team works with the project teams, our colleagues in country who are represented here, our technical experts to understand the emerging needs and opportunities as they arise on the ground. Because our colleagues are much closer to our developing member countries, to industry, and even to our communities. So that's on the demand side. But on the supply side, we also have mechanisms in place, regular touch points, reporting, and consultations with our financing partners. First, to develop eligibility and prioritization, but also to keep them informed when there are new developments, as they come quite often, but also when complex transactions arise that need further consideration, because I think it's important that there is a common understanding of the impact that's desired and the results that we want to achieve, and even how we get there. So I think that those are some of the important ways by which we try to ensure that the grants are used in an impactful way.
Thanks for that. And I really see that being really thoughtful. I love that you talked about, and earlier as well, on the flexibility, especially as we do something innovative. We need that flexibility in order to adjust as we learn how these transactions can be structured, how we can do this, and so that we can have the resources to really push these over the line. Now, I'm going to jump over to you, Dion, just because I think, kind of relating the two. And it's a question that I had planned after, but I think it suits now. When it comes to transition carbon credits, and we have grant funding, so how can those work together? Or how can they not work together? I guess both of those questions are kind of relevant.
Thanks, David. And I think this is really the way to think about this. So the way we have been conceptualizing how the two would interact is in a way an expansion of the toolkit that we have, right? Not all coal plants are built and financed alike. I think that's a generic statement we can say, right? So a single financing solution is not going to be enough for us to address the different variations of the in specific coal plants that we're looking at. Some coal plants may have longer tail operations, then refinancing may be possible. Some may have front-loaded remaining operating life, so a longer refinancing is not possible, but that may also mean that we can then start retiring earlier and get the annual financing from carbon credit. So combining these two allow us to broaden the type of intervention that we are able to do to the different types of plants that are out there. And I think what has been very helpful is that with all the progress and all this common language or common understanding, we ourselves are beginning to have much better clarity what additionality is brought about by the concessional financing, what additionality is brought about by the carbon credit, so that then we can articulate better how these two products or toolkits can work hand in hand in developing solutions for early coal retirement.
Thanks for that, Dion. And yeah, that word additionality, I think sometimes we see that there's a desire for carbon credits on top of grant, or carbon credits for something that was going to happen anyways. And these are things that we have to be very careful. And it goes back to your credibility comment earlier. And I think that's really important, because we've seen the damage of using carbon credits for something that isn't defined as additional or credible, can create tremendous damage to this potential asset class. I want to shift gears a bit, and I'm going to go back and forth between the different topics. And Rangina, so thanks for sharing kind of the structure and your engagement on both safeguards previously in the ETM team and now with the NGO Center. But I'd love to hear your kind of explanation of why has ETM attracted so much critique from NGOs and CSOs? This has been a bit surprising to me because I thought, we're trying to accelerate the retirement of coal-fired power plants. I thought we would be celebrated. So I'd love to hear your views on why that has been quite a challenging part of this.
Yeah, thank you, David. I took notes during the previous session, and I found it really helpful. And it's good that I made it to sit and listen to what our government counterparts mentioned. And you, in the very beginning, as well as like our government counterparts, echoed the complex nature and associated with financial engineering around ETM. Right. And we've been also discussing during the break with Dion how business unusual is not a straightforward thing to do, and it generates a lot of questions. So when we think about ETM and coming back to your point on, you thought, oh, okay, it's financial model and it will be pretty easy to do that, right? And it was not as easy. And I remember also the time when David was a little disheartened by the reaction from our CSO counterparts. And then when it sinked in, I think we all agreed that the critique that comes from civil society and various other counterparts on one side of it is related to the ambiguity related to the nature of the complex financial engineering. And associated with that is also, if most of you were part of the previous session, you listened to a previous session, and things like, for instance, state losses that were brought by Pa Dimas, this is associated with the discussion around ETM. But this is not something that can be straightforward disclosed or shared with broad stakeholder groups, right? And because of these kind of limitations or sensitivities around disclosure of information or other types of information that relate to financial or commercial negotiations that are also bound by non-disclosure agreements, it's not always possible to disclose information fully, as opposed to when we deal with it from a compliance perspective within our access to information policy. And this may not necessarily be always easy to accept or understand. Because sometimes we we are dealing with the situations that we don't even know whether we have a project or not, right? Which means we are not in a position to disclose any information. And even if we have the concept, we are also limited in what we can and cannot disclose, again, for various good reasons. That's another part of it. Then, because of limited disclosure, we probably another point of concern that civil society raises is application of ADB's safeguards, environmental, social, and then, but beyond safeguards, also other policies that are of relevance. Gender policy, we've heard accusation of being gender blind in the very beginning when we just started a high-level scoping exercise. And this is related to another point of differences between project-specific assessments that we do when we have a project. These are pretty straightforward. We assess the project based on what potential impacts and risks there is, and we plan the mitigation measures around that. But we also have different tools, and you mentioned earlier during our engagement with CSOs that the toolbox can exactly apply to depending on what products are we dealing with, right? From safeguards perspective, assessments such as strategic environmental social assessment, these are high level, and we do not look at a single transaction. And the results, therefore, differ from the expected results that we would otherwise be disclosing on transaction-specific assessments, right? So these are the confusions, I think, that that generate critique. But if you look back into the historical engagement and the tone and the questions we get, I feel like I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I feel like we are getting there. And it is important to continue the engagement and explain the different types of tools that we have, different engagement modalities, limitations that are associated with information disclosure. And again, I would like to emphasize that business as usual is not always easy to do. It's challenging. And we are not perfect, like Dion just reminded me earlier, but we remain committed to making sure that all our projects and operations strictly follow our policies and procedures and requirements, including on social safeguards, including on engagement with civil society. And if you look, again, looking back, when we just started the journey, now it is pretty much stakeholder engagement, including engagement with civil society, is a given now in any engagement with any countries. So I think it was both about the critique, but then also how this critique helped us also reflect on how we do the business unusual moving forward.
No, thanks. Thanks for that, Rangi. And I think it is a good reminder of the journey that we've taken on this specific part of the work. And indeed, I think the questions, both the questions we are receiving now, are much more sophisticated, which are harder to answer, but also are part of the challenge of what we're trying to do. Because as we heard from the previous speakers, this comes down to people, serving the people of the various nations with resources such as electricity and heat, but doing that in a way that is the best for them economically, socially, environmentally. So thanks again for that reminder. And that brings me to you, Swati. You started to as you described just transition in the ETM context. You described it earlier, and you kind of stopped when you started to get a little bit granular, which was noted. But I guess, if when we look at the, I'll give you one reflection or one memory from our consultation. We met with some of the community at one of the power plants, and it was about a 10-year-old plant, and they said, many years ago we were fisher folk and farmers. Then this plant was built, and now we work at the coal plant, and we've adjusted our lives, and now you want to close the coal plant. We're going to have to adjust our lives again. Where are our jobs? We might not like the pollution, but I appreciate the job that I have to feed my family. So, when I hear something like that, I'm thankful to have you and your team as part of us to help address those. For one, just answer the questions, but then create the plans to address those issues. Can you reflect on some of those?
Thanks, David. So the reason I stopped earlier was also because when we start explaining what we do on just transitions in ETM, it needs a much more detailed explanation. And let me start. And let me give you this example by giving real life examples, right? There is not one country right now that has a dedicated just transition policy. And And this is a real challenge when we're thinking about it from the legal side of the equation. Um, Now, if you don't have an overarching national regulation that incentivizes just transition processes, how do you then start implementing this at the asset level? And that is something that we actually started facing in Indonesia. I was not here when we started the ETM journey and when we started the just transition journey in Indonesia, but that is something that we started facing. And when we go down this road, then we say, okay, there is no national level process, but there are still going to be people who are going to be impacted. How do we start developing a plan? What are the boundaries of this plan that we need to start thinking about? Is it a project boundary? Because my original explanation of just transition is it's a whole of an economy approach. It is not a particular project. But when we start with ETM and when we start with not just ETM, with all ADB projects, we have to think about it from a project boundary perspective. And then limiting that project boundary becomes an issue. The Fisher Folk example that you gave, the person benefited or got used to the plant being around, has seen benefits from the CSR part of it. But CSR is one aspect of the legal boundary. What about the shopkeepers who've benefited in that area because of an asset that has been created in that area? When you remove that asset from that area, will their revenues go down? Possibly. On whose onus do we put the fact that these revenues are going to go down, especially without a national level policy in play or a regional level policy in place? Somebody has to pay for this, but who pays for it? And the reason why I'm bringing this out as a question is because these are some of the questions that we've been collectively trying to answer over the last 2-3 years when we're working at the asset level. And then you put this in the context of what Rangina explained, stakeholder consultation, because we do in-depth stakeholder consultation. And these are actually, the question that David put was I think one of the mildest questions that we got during that stakeholder consultation. And these are questions that we do end up getting, saying, how are you going to protect our livelihood? How are you going to ensure that we get jobs? Because your thermal power plants are not all of them are closing tomorrow. Some of them are closing 10 years down the line. And we are trying to put in place a process that will move with or without ADB being in play 10 years down the line. And these are questions that we need to anticipate and answer. And that then comes to the larger discussion of how do we put a boundary around projects? What is the onus that comes on the project developer, on the asset owners? What is the onus that goes beyond the asset owners and the project developers? And then how do we create this ecosystem to then ensure that it's not just one stakeholder who needs to act, but you have multiple stakeholders that need to act at the same time. And this takes time. It's not about waking up overnight and having an institutional planning that can be done. This takes a while because you're not convincing one set of people. Every person has different interests and levels of influence that they have from that particular asset. So you're trying to bring consensus not from one stakeholder, but at least 5 different stakeholders. And you're trying to establish a process which then will not even start formulating today. You are trying to do something for 5 years down the line or 8 years down the line. And that then sometimes it creates confusion. We are hoping now that we have established communication lines through Rangina and the NGOC, through our communications team who is not here today, but they were here in the morning through the communications team. So we've started establishing a process by which we can communicate some of these things right at the get-go, start putting together an engagement plan, and that which then will help develop the just transition plan and process. I hope I've answered your question in this, David.
No, because we haven't answered the question yet. I think corporately or within ETM. But I think what you've demonstrated very much is, again, the people at the center of the just transition and ETM and the just energy transition. But also highlighted, the level of effort that this is. It's not just about closing a coal plant and saying it'll all be fine. No, we have the opportunity to plan for that, and that kind of brings me back, to you, Joyce. Again, I think this is incredibly compelling. The work that we're doing, just transition, amongst all the other things. How do you develop a pitch, to potential donors for ETM PTF? Because that's the other part that I think is kind of interesting, that, when it comes to, seeking resources to do something that we believe important, we have to do that along other important things. There's developments in the water sector, in the health sector, in the education sector. So what do you, how do you develop your pitch, or how does the team develop their pitch to donors for ETM?
Yes, and the pitch is an open invitation, and it is to potential financing partners, but also current financing partners, because there are opportunities for replenishment. But we would like to think that contribution to ETM PTF is really a fantastic way of leveraging ADB's experience, expertise, and stakeholder relationships in the region that we've really developed over time. It's being able to tap into our pipeline development exercise and our policy engagement. So when we talk about reforms, even those mentioned by the first panel, this is a way for partners to be able to contribute towards institutionalizing the reforms that we're trying to introduce. And it's also a way of building on our established processes and mechanisms, such as those related to fund administration, safeguards, project monitoring and evaluation. And these things are especially important to have when we're trying to do a new initiative like ETM. Just having, in the face of all the uncertainty, it is great to be able to build on something that is established and trusted. And I would like to think that ADB is strongly positioned to be able to work with our partners on this for the longer term. We've had a lot of knowledge and lessons learned, both from successes and challenges these past few years, and partners can obviously tap into that. And pooling resources with those of ADB and other donors is a great way to extend reach and impact beyond what partners can do on their own. And if that's not compelling enough, it really is a great team. We really have people with strong technical expertise, deep understanding, and passionate about what we're trying to accomplish with ETM. And that's something that's inspired me over these past few years working with the team towards something that we really believe can benefit our DMCs for the long run.
For that, because I agree. I enjoy and believe that in the passion of
the problems are complex, but you're in good company when you join us.
And some would say misery loves company, but that's that's not what we're saying. No, thanks for that. And I think what has been also encouraging when I talk to the donor community is their engagement, actually. And you highlighted that in your introduction, that there is such a strong interest in what we're trying to do. And it's very interesting to see countries that have coal in their systems, or are trying to exit coal as well, or actually, New Zealand's an interesting one. I don't know if they have any coal or very little coal in their system, that they're all coming to this to say, we want to support this for various different reasons and believing in its importance. So yeah, thanks for highlighting those comments. I want to go back to the carbon credits again, and you gave both in your introduction and in your first response, kind of some details on how they can work and how they can fit in the ETM structure. Can you highlight some of the misunderstandings by stakeholders that go along with carbon credits? Because I think sometimes that's not to insult or make fun of anyone, but to highlight some of the real ways it works and some of the misunderstandings that can either confuse people or make it look too simple or too easy.
Thanks, David, for the question. I think based on our experience engaging with the ecosystem around the transition carbon credit, the first question we face in a lot of this discussion is, how does it work? Most people who are familiar with carbon credit knows that you have carbon credit to incentivize building something. Here, what we're doing is slightly the reverse. We need carbon credits to help take out something or accelerate a retirement of something. So that itself is a bit of a reframing that needed to happen with how people should appreciate the transition carbon credit, right? So there is still building something that will happen. But for that building something, and in this case, that's the replacement clean energy that needs to happen, we need to incentivize that by taking out something first. And that's really the acceleration of the coal retirement. Most people would appreciate the later part, but do not really understand the challenge faced in taking out first. And that's really where most of the intervention is needed. So a lot of that the interactions you have with the ecosystem and in explaining the transition carbon credit is really more on that. How does this product help us to accelerate the retirement so that then we can incentivize the development of the clean energy sources that follow? Now, the second challenge related to that is how do they then have comfort that credits that they buy today would be recognized further on in the future? Because we have one trigger event. I take out the plant today and the credit trails on for what would have been the expected useful life of the plant, right? So that's where a more nuanced of understanding of the baselining needs to happen, of applicability condition needs to happen. So for example, the Vera approved methodology that was recently published ensures that there needs to be a 40% pairing that happens. So we don't give you 100% of the credit until we see at least 40% replacement energy coming on board. All right. So sorry, it's two steps. First one is we don't give you the credit if we don't see a 10% happening first. And then we don't give you the full credit until we see a 40% at least happening by a certain period. So that kind of setting the stage on how we can ensure that the carbon credits would persist or the avoided emission that has happened because of the retirement of the coal plant would be permanent, is enshrined in this methodology and standards that are being developed. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And you just helped me with my understanding, or my misunderstanding. Thanks. And Hannah, just before I do want to ask Swati and Rangina another question, but we'll come to you with questions from the audience. I want to keep on this kind of theme of, when people look at things and oversimplify. And so I'm going to go to you, Swati, and then Rangina. Where do you see the biggest gap in understanding of JT, specifically for ETM?
I think the biggest gap in understanding JT for ETM is understanding there are three gaps. The first gap is about understanding who is responsible for what kind of actions. And that is linked to the boundary of the project. And I keep referring to the boundary of the project. It may confuse non-ADB folks, so which is why I thought I should simplify it. There are, the way you look at JT under ETM, or you look at the direct impacts, you look at the indirect impacts, and then you look at the induced impacts. For the sake of explanation, direct impacts are those who are directly working with the plant, all kinds of employment linked folks. Your indirect are typically your supply chains, and any other contractors who have any contractual obligation to the plant. Your induced is the local economy around it, right? So these are your three buckets. When we think about it from a project boundary lens, or who is supposed to, who is responsible for what action, and then you apply this question to a project boundary lens, the answers are limited. Because there is only so much that you can do, and we do within the lens of that project boundary, which is where my earlier explanation was you need both forces to come together. So that, I think, is the first lack of understanding, that there are things that we can do and that we are doing for the people who are going to be impacted, but the extent of it may not meet expectations. And that message, and communicating that message, is really hard, because it's not as if we can write a report and put that report out and people will read it. No, we face this question when we go down for stakeholder consultation, for any form of communication, and trying to convey this is really hard, because you're dealing with people's lives at the end of the day. And communicating that, we are trying to take care of you, but we can't actually tell you what we are planning to do. Because again, going back to what Rangina mentioned about state laws, a lot of the information is also something that we can't actively end up disclosing, even under just transition considerations and the transparencies that we try to put in place. We have been asked questions on what is the total, deal that is happening. How much of that comes to us? Now, these are commercially sensitive information that we're not in position to give, at least until the deal is final. And it is not our place to do this, because it's typically the asset owners who need to be communicating. So if we can put in place that the asset owners communicate, that is a win. So that is, I think, point number 1 and 2. And I think the last part of it is when is what David mentioned right at the beginning, right? Like JT's, when you think about just transition, it's really big. Just putting that into bite-sized pieces and communicating that requires so many layers in the middle. And a lot of it can just get lost in translation. A lot of it does get lost in translation, to be quite honest. The number of times that we've answered the same questions again and again, and trust me, none of us actually have a problem answering those questions again and again. But I'm just saying that a lot of it gets lost in translation, and which is where, that's why earlier I referred to Rangina and to our communications colleague, because without them, a lot of what stakeholders would understand of just transition would also be lost. And which is where I think the third gap in getting people to understand is relevant material, is pushing that relevant material down, pushing a strategy down that then helps, disseminate this relevant material again and again and again. Because we keep saying that just transition is an iterative process, and it is. And one of the reasons why it is iterative is because a lot of things get lost in translation, because it is an intergenerational process. Today, what the father would know still needs to be communicated to the family 5 years down the line. And because it's an iterative process, you need to have that kind of planning, which sometimes gets lost, because it's sometimes very difficult to think like that long term and plan for like so many different things.
Thanks again for that. I'm, again, having that ability to communicate that, to do that again. And that again goes with our engagement, links with our engagement with civil society, as you highlighted. And so, linking that up, Rengina, what advice would you give to, some of the CSO or NGO stakeholders, to governments and even to ADB itself to, really strengthen that communication to ensure that the messages, as little as possible, get lost in translation? So what would you advise?
Okay, let me start with the government counterparts, because the earlier session was really helpful. And this also has something to do with what Swati mentioned in terms of concepts, definitions being lost in translation. That does not necessarily mean like translation from one language to another, but that also means the level of sophistication of the messaging, or making the messaging understandable. This is when we try and recommend something for our government counterparts, I think one important recommendation that we carry through and we confirmed its importance is, wherever possible, ensure that there is early and meaningful stakeholder engagement. And however complex it may look like or sound like, and we're happy to help with simplifying that messaging, is communicating messages that are possible to communicate. Those that are, of course, not sensible, or relating to the point that that Swati was making, is sometimes even just transition decisions. It's not about the sensitivities around the deal and making it final before going to disclose. I would rather reformulate and say, it is not possible to disclose and share information because it raises expectations. So because nothing is confirmed yet, even in terms of commitment, and you raise expectations, then again, talking about losing in between some concepts and some promises, this may perhaps not necessarily be the best way to address things. So for the governments, I think early engagement and early and inclusive engagement to make the dialogue meaningful. I think, and I'm glad to see that in Indonesia, for example, we see that prominent civil society organizations are part of the discussions. It's not always easy, again, and it's not because the agenda is tough. But they are already part of the discussion. They were part of the JETP discussions, and they do contribute to formulating this comprehensive investment and policy plan, right? So similar arrangements would be probably helpful to also share as a good practice to ensure at some point cross learning between the countries that are engaged in ETM. For civil society, I just thought about the one of the topics that we discussed internally within the team, that NGOs and in general civil society is not monolithic or not homogeneous, and we probably tend to think it is, but because it's not monolithic, you end up receiving calls like from one extreme to another. One call would be like, shut down the power plant that we are, residing around, because it's an old one. You have to shut it down, and ETM is the best mechanism to do that, right? On another end, we receive calls again about shutting down all the power plants, coal power plants, immediately. There's another extreme. So associated with that, of course, are the challenges of, okay, if we recommend to shut down the power plant now, immediately, what's going to happen with power supply to social institutions, to schools, to hospitals, to what will happen to all the other commitments to support infrastructure that all these power plants do. What will happen to people, again, linking to just transition. Therefore, it's an iterative process and it's a long-term process, right? So it's not easy. That's another recommendation, observation. And then other extreme would be around false solutions. It's something that also the team is discussing. We earlier again heard about ammonia and when it's going to become a sustainable, marketable solution, right? So all of this, if we look at these messages that and calls that we are receiving, I think one key recommendation is that any engagement would be meaningful and would lead to a dialogue when it is constructive. It's not only the call, but also potentially the solutions that comes with the call or with the request that makes it request and engagement meaningful. On the other hand, we can see that, again, coming back to NGOs and CSOs not being a monolithic body, our engagement with NGOs including as part of our Walcott preparatory activities, found that CSOs at the local level, okay, we're running out of time. CSO at the local level are not aware of what's happening at the national level. So how do we translate that agenda in a way that CSOs at the local level can participate meaningfully and make the solutions localized that can tailor to the needs of those who are affected? One of the P's is people, right? And people at the local level should be benefiting from the energy transition mechanism. This is for CSOs. I guess working together constructively is something that would benefit, after all of us. And for ADB, of course, I already mentioned that throughout these years, we've learned and we've been refining our engagement. We've been looking into channels and ways and mechanisms to make our engagement meaningful. I can name the ETM email, the Facebook page that we keep receiving inquiries, the letters that we respond, the ETM web page that we are also constantly monitoring, and we are disclosing information there. We have an NGO and civil society center website, which can also be tapped into. And we also, as an NGO center, we organize CSO sessions, and we are happy to continuously improve that engagement. And any recommendations, suggestions, again, constructive, so that we can all work together and partner for making this initiative meaningful, would be welcomed. So I think that's for ADB. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So continued learning is the message that I'm hearing, and indeed, I hope we can keep doing that. Hannah, do we have a number of questions?
We do, David. Let me start with, so as before, we consolidated some of them, same topics. Let me start with the first question. Did or do countries receive support to check on the feasibility of coal to RE replacement, and why ammonia co-firing is a viable option? This seems to undermine phase out.
I'm just wondering who's going to answer that one. You're pointing at me, or you're putting your hand up? Yeah, okay. I look, when we do when we look at a transaction, we one of the key pieces of analysis we do is what we call a grid study, and that basically looks at if the plant continues to operate and for its expected technical life, what is the cost of the system, and then what is the without scenario. And in the without, what are the replacement power options that that go with this. And replacement power options can be, and as some of the earlier speakers highlighted from the countries, gas, renewables, advanced technologies such as ammonia, biomass, co-firing, things like that. Now, when we look at these, it doesn't mean we intend to fund these necessarily, but it is something that we want to look at. We want to be agnostic when it comes to technologies. And when it comes to ammonia as one that is, it seems to be a hot button sometimes. People call that a false solution. CCUS is another one that's called a false solution. I would say today it's not viable cost effectively. So it's not going to happen today. I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. I continue to go back to my beginning of my career where solar was not viable from a cost-effective point of view. And today it is, in some parts, the cheapest technology. So in that respect, I'm not willing to rule out any technologies, but indeed, when the time frame for closing the plant is in the next 2 years or 3 years, we're not going to consider ammonia co-firing for full replacement, because we know, or we do the analysis though that demonstrates it is not viable. But long term it might be, and I'm not willing to reject that at this stage. I don't think it undermines, and phase out. This undermines phase out. I just don't think that's correct. We're not, a coal plant that burns a green material. The technology might be the same, but the emissions are different. We're against the emissions from coal-fired power plants, not the coal-fired power plants themselves. And that's something I think that sometimes they get lumped together. So again, we don't want if we can get rid of the emissions, but the plant operates and still produces the electricity, I think we've met success. And that's the same success as using solar and batteries to produce that electricity. So that's why I think that last part of the system question doesn't quite jive with me.
Thanks, David. Now we direct the question towards Dion. We actually received like 6 or 7 about carbon credits out of 17. So does ADB intend to raise carbon credits from the ETM for sale into the carbon market? And then related as well, granted that not all coal plants are built equally, what type of plants are more suitable for carbon credits? And I'll squeeze in a third one. Will ADB be participating in methodology development?
Okay, thanks for all the questions. So maybe I'll just take them one by one. So the first one, does ADB intend to raise carbon credits? The role of ADB in the development of the carbon market is in multiple folds, and I'll elaborate how each of them is. The first one is we work with our member countries to help them with creating the enabling environment for which a carbon market would develop. So part of this would involve working with the relevant ministries or agencies within the government to help them understand first, what is their inventory in terms of assets that would have carbon credit potential. So building of country level registry is one of such activities. We also would then help them to set up the carbon market framework, or what will be the step before any legislative work that they may need to enact for them to enable the sale of carbon credits. And then at the same time, we also can work with our member countries in terms of advising them if they do have projects which has the potential to generate carbon credits, how best should they present those projects. So we support in terms of helping them develop the project documents, engaging the ecosystem in terms of promoting the project, answering any questions in terms of the specificity of the project itself. Whether ADB intends to offtake and sell, I think we are not closing the door on that, but at this stage, we don't yet have a facility that would allow us to be a market maker. So buy and then trade those credit. But if it, I take it on a first principle basis, if that helps us achieve our objective in terms of leading to overall reduction, and if we have the resources and the know-how to make that happen, I think we are able to step into that role eventually. So that's the first one. The second one on what type of coal plants would be more suited for carbon credits. I think in my perspective, it is possible for almost any type of coal plant to qualify for carbon credits on an early retirement scheme. What will matter is how do we position this coal plant in terms of our ambition in how early we want to retire them and how we want to develop the clean energy replacement that would take over once these coal plants are gone. Because the core element of transition carbon credit is that it should not just be about the retirement, but the replacement that happens afterwards, so that then we have some certainty that there is permanence in that reduction of emission that happens. So this is where we are able to work with different sponsors, including government agencies, to really understand the profile of their coal plant, their future plans in terms of how they can do the early retirement and the development of the replacement, and package that in a way that will resonate with what the investors of the transition carbon credits are looking at. Third question, will ADB participate in the methodology? ADB is currently developing its submission for Article 6 methodology. So that will be submitted to UNFCCC for their consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Dion. I'll now proceed to the next question addressed to Joyce. ADB So the question for Joyce, ADB has needs for lots of concessional finance. What is the priority of ETM among other needs when it comes to asking for more money?
Well, ETM remains to be a strategic priority of ADB. When we started this a few years back, we knew it was going to be a long game. We knew it wouldn't happen overnight. And as we dug deeper, we uncovered just how complex, the issues were. So, it remains to be an important and relevant piece of work. The good thing about ETM is that we can trumpet its benefits that are climate related, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not limited to just that. It targets other benefits that resonate with our donors, that keep it relevant for them as well. Aspects such as, economic development, inclusion stemming from the desire of our donors to participate in poverty reduction, the whole just transition component. So those things continue to make ETM relevant for our partners. Admittedly, though, it's about welcoming more resources, yes, but also demonstrating that we can deploy the money meaningfully, that we can monitor it, and we can demonstrate success. Because I think that it's also on us to be able to communicate the progress and tell successful stories so people know, what success looks like. And we continue to keep up the urgency for people to contribute resources to it. So it's both ways, I think.
I want to comment as well that, there are so many development needs out there in the world, in our region. And it is sometimes like ADB in its totality is only a drop in the bucket in terms of addressing that. And so ETM is a significant issue. We believe this is important. It was a gap in terms of the overall energy transition space. How do we address coal plants? But equally, we have to partner with others to do this in all our spaces, in health and education, in water and transport. So I think we do approach this courageously but humbly, to note that we're not the most important issue. We're just taking a look at an important issue and doing our best to address it.
Thank you, Joyce, and also to David. Next question. I think this could be answered either by Rangina or Swati on gender. Can you elaborate how the ETM and ADB incorporate gender considerations for the affected communities in the project design and monitoring? And there was also a comment about a CSO publication about gender considerations of ETM.
Yeah, so it's interesting how the question is formulated as if ETM is not within ADB. So, because ETM that we are talking about, at least, this is the initiative that ADB is piloting. I would perhaps just remind that first, for any projects, transactions that will be or are or will be designed as part of ETM, they will have to follow ADB's gender policy, similar to other policies that ADB operations are bound to or must follow. But when it comes to incorporating details of gender considerations at the level of affected communities in the project design and monitoring, I think one cannot generalize, cannot specify beyond something that is perhaps known already. Usually at the project design stage, at the project preparatory stage, one ADB team that includes also colleagues from gender division, they conduct gender assessment, and based on this assessment and based on the project and its nature and scope and impact, then the elements of design come with regards to gender considerations and how those are incorporated in the project. When we classify our projects for safeguards, we also do the same for gender, and depending on that classification, there are gender action plans prepared for projects. Again, different modalities will have different approach, but this is by far and large how gender considerations are incorporated in the project design. When it comes to affected people, not communities in general, but affected people or households and people directly or indirectly affected by the project through land acquisition or resettlement and economic displacement or physical displacement, or when it comes to impacts through indigenous peoples safeguards lens, then these gender considerations are a must to be incorporated in the first in the social impact assessment, and then second, resulting from that, we would design the measures, mitigation measures and compensation measures, considering gender aspects. So this is when it comes to monitoring, then subsequently, if we are talking about gender considerations or gender dimensions as part of safeguards planning documents, monitoring of this is done as part of our routine monitoring, and then borrowers and clients would submit monitoring reports that include at the very minimum gender disaggregated data and the impacts and compensations, etc., broken down into again by disaggregated by sex. When it comes to broader affected communities, there are also elements in the gender action plan, and this is typically also reported by borrower or a client through our quarterly progress report or any other types like annual report, depending on the project, depending on the requirement agreed for the project. And typically, all of these are reflected in the project documents, and they are disclosed. These are not confidential information. When it comes to ETM, I perhaps would like to maybe add another element, because when we talk about programmatic approach to ETM, we similar to other elements like financial, technical, we look into different ways and channels where we can tap to make sure that gender considerations are also incorporated at the programmatic level, such as like, through SIF supported Walcott, women leaders in coal transition. We are trying to make sure that gender considerations are not only incorporated at the specific project level, but also we help civil society and our government counterparts to work on these aspects and to advance gender agenda and to make energy transition gender just. With that.
We also incorporate gender in just transition. So when we are looking at the just transition plan, a lot of the gender disaggregated data helps us create socioeconomic profile of the women who are not only employed at the thermal power plant or whatever fossil fuel asset, but also the community around the area. This socioeconomic profile helps us identify what would be the most ideal mitigation action. So in terms of mitigation action, if you're thinking reskilling, if you're thinking upskilling, if you're thinking the kind of CSR initiatives that need to be put in place, these are some things that we get from this gender disaggregated data. When we go down on the field to communicate, to get the data as well as to communicate what we plan to do, we do have separate focus group discussions that involve only women to ensure that we've incorporated their concerns into the plan. And in terms, and this is just on the project design, when we are looking at monitoring, there are separate indicators in the Just Transition Plan that specifically mention measures that are directed for women, not just at your employment level, but also at the community level.
Perhaps maybe just a little more addition to that. You mentioned the methods to engage, and this reminded me that I didn't necessarily go into that level of detail, but just in case, as part of, again, standard business process, we do not only do consultations, public consultations with wider communities, but we also tailor communities to the needs of, depending on the country and community context. We can have, we typically have separate focus group discussions or key informant interviews with women only when there is a, context specific need. We also do community consultations when indigenous peoples are involved. We do with women, indigenous, from indigenous communities, or if there are different ethnic groups, then we do the same with them to make sure that engagement is not only meaningful, but also gender just. I think just to add on that.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think that's, we're coming up to the actual, I think we're over time. Sorry, how are we closing?
We can close, David.
Okay.
You wrap up.
Okay. So, anyways, thank you for that. On the other questions, Rengina, just remind me, we can take those and respond. I don't know how we're going to respond because they were anonymous in nature. Yep. Yep. So we can respond. So, I'd like to close the session. Oh, sorry. If people would like the answers to the questions they submitted, please provide your information, and we'd be happy to respond by email or other as necessary. So, look, thank you guys. And I can say guys, I don't have to be formal because I see them every day. Thank you, Joyce, Rengina, Swati, and Dion. The depth you bring to this discussion, to the ETM program, is absolutely necessary and valued. So thank you for that, and please join me in thanking them for their contribution today. So I'll just quickly close the session. Is that yes? Okay, so look, thank you all for staying to join us today. At the end of the day, thank you for your support, and I'll say support and challenge to the work that we're doing. And we hope to continue to provide updates and progress and share our learnings as we work to reduce emissions and support the energy transition. So thank you very much.